After this morning's visit for the drone flights, we are now back again at Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was the extermination camp that was established after Auschwitz the first term and was specifically created to further optimize the Nazis' time and efficiency. Here, it became possible to kill many more people each day, about 7,000 to 8,000 people per day, because the large crematoria were constructed and put into operation here. Even bigger. Our journey into the Holocaust starts here from Poland.
It will definitely be a very busy day, which actually started this morning at dawn. The day started very early because we were able to get special permits that allowed us to visit privately and also to fly over Auschwitz. So we arrived extremely early just to do the drone footage, and now we are here to do a private, exclusive tour. Suddenly, people like us, friends, relatives, acquaintances, were discriminated against, deprived of all rights, and deported to concentration camps like this one.
Before we start, however, we want to ask you for a simple support, because during 2022 we had more than 4 million views here on the channel, but only almost 14,000 of you subscribed. Subscribe here to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss all the new episodes that will come on the Holocaust theme, but not only. Located in the German-occupied part of Poland, about an hour from Krakow, we are in the vicinity of the Polish town of Oświęcim. Auschwitz consisted of 3 camps, one of which was used as an extermination center. The 3 camps were opened over a period of about 2 years. Between 1940 and 1942, it became from 1942 the largest of the various concentration camp complexes and played a key role in the implementation of the so-called final solution planned by the Nazis to kill the Jews of Europe.
The Auschwitz complex is often mistakenly called Auschwitz-Birkenau, but Birkenau, or Auschwitz II, was only one of the sections within the complex, the one used as an extermination center, where the gas chambers were located.
The construction of Auschwitz II, or Auschwitz-Birkenau, began in October 1941. It was the one that had the largest number of prisoners. The camp consisted of more than a dozen sectors separated by electrified barbed wire fences at 400 volts. You just had to touch it and you would die. Many threw themselves against it to end it all. But this was a problem for the Nazis because then they would have to untangle the bodies. So it was forbidden to go past those posts. But quite often, objects were intentionally thrown in order to make the inmates run toward the barbed wire. So the sentries were officially authorized to shoot the inmates, and this was considered worth the prize or even a leave of absence because they had supposedly prevented a suicide. We chose to visit Auschwitz on April 25th, a holiday for us Italians, the day of liberation from Nazism and fascism. We chose this very day because it's important to remember, once again, because as Primo Levi wrote, it happened, therefore it can happen again. It all began here on these tracks. After endless journeys, crammed like animals into wagons, 80 people at a time, the deportees would arrive. Most of them were Jews guilty of being born Jewish.
This is one of the original wagons. They arrived here from all over Europe. As soon as they arrived, the doors would open, and besides the SS, they would come face to face with the capos. The capos were prisoners just like them, chosen to be responsible for maintaining discipline, and they often used very violent, coercive methods. Upon arrival, the prisoners had to undergo a selection process by the SS and the SS doctors. Men were separated from women, and in an instant, love, friendships, and relatives were torn apart, and the people were made more vulnerable. Then they were separated into two more groups, one larger and one smaller. The larger group included the exhausted, the sick, pregnant women, people unfit for work, and children, people destined for immediate death.
Those who could work were sent to a specific part of a building and forced to undress. The few who remained alive, destined for slavery, had their heads shaved. They were given a uniform with an identification number and a triangle of a different color depending on their ethnicity.
The survivors didn't know what their fate would be, and they didn't know the fate of the people, their loved ones who had been sent to the larger group. They didn't know that those columns of smoke and that acrid smell they sensed were the souls of their loved ones.
We're going to show you some truly exclusive and rare footage in full agreement with the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, which has very kindly granted us this private and special tour. We'll be able to film, and we're even going to go inside some of the blocks that are not normally open to visitors, but will be exclusive to the tour we're doing today.
The prisoners lived in these enormous, spacious stables, which were converted into temporary barracks, housing up to 400 or 500 people.
This was in fact a place originally intended for livestock because it's a completely open space, like a stable. And here, where the temperatures are obviously already freezing, we also find a sort of heating system, but in reality it was never used. So people would often seek shelter on the higher bunks, but above all, the only thing that truly allowed them to stay warm was the close proximity of their bodies to one another, because up to 4 people slept together on each bunk. In fact, these beds would often give way and collapse completely. The day at the Auschwitz concentration camp began very early, at dawn. The prisoners were woken by the sound of a gong. A second gong sounded, warning them to quickly run for roll call. After that, they proceeded to go to work. The working hours were 12 hours during the summer and 10 hours during the winter.
Here we have the bathroom area. Here was where they washed, with sinks just like the ones we saw in Block 2, while over here were the latrines. The latrines here will be about 200 in total. There are 3 blocks just like this one, each holding roughly 600 latrines for 5,000 to 6,000 people. And they weren't located inside, near, where they slept, where the barracks were, but far away. So people had to walk in any kind of weather condition. They really had to come here, and here the hygienic conditions were simply terrible. This was the section for the gypsy families, so families lived here all together, mothers, men, and children, in very poor hygienic conditions.
These are the tracks where the trains arrived here every single day from all over Europe. And once they finally arrived at this very place, the selection process began immediately. After the first arrivals, however, information gradually began to circulate. There are testimonies from children who reveal that they declared a different age, specifically that they were older upon arriving here at Auschwitz II in order to improve their chances of survival. Specifically and precisely because during the selection process, those over a certain age were sent into slavery, while those below a certain age, the younger children, were destined for death because they were not useful to the Nazi project. The selection, however, had already begun during the train journey itself, because people had to endure this journey in a clearly dramatic and distressing state of mind, but especially because of the extremely dramatic and harsh conditions inside the trains, because there were as many as 80 people living together inside a single wagon intended for livestock. and they had absolutely no possibility of sitting or lying down, so they were forced to remain standing for the entire time. All of these things made the people increasingly fragile and vulnerable. Starting from the journey itself, Auschwitz-Birkenau also had the facilities and equipment of an extermination center, and in fact the camp played a central role in the German plan to murder the Jews of Europe.
Initially, the SS authorities used two separate farmhouses located near Birkenau as makeshift gas chambers. The first provisional gas chamber began operating in January of 1942 and was later dismantled after some time. The second provisional gas chamber continued to operate from 1942 until the autumn of 1944. However, the SS authorities considered these existing structures to be insufficient to carry out the number of executions that were planned for both Auschwitz and Birkenau. And so, 4 large crematoria buildings were constructed between March and June of the year 1943. Each of these facilities consisted of 3 parts: a changing room, a large gas chamber, and an area containing the crematoria ovens.
We have entered here inside the crematorium of Birkenau. This structure behind me is the main gate, the historic and infamous entrance to the crematorium, this very one, and this is what's left. We saw at Auschwitz I how the entire Nazi extermination chain was carefully organized. So people would arrive here and wait for their turn, often in silence. Then they would go down below. And down below, the first stage was the undressing room, so they would get undressed, and then they would move on to the second part. The second part was the gas chambers. Basically, after entering there, they would walk forward naked to the gas chambers where Zyklon B was then released. We actually saw the Zyklon B in the Auschwitz I section.
The gas looked like small rounded pebbles. About 5 to 7 kilograms were used in total, and the amount was carefully calculated to avoid any unnecessary waste. These pebbles, in contact with heat, released cyanide. Those underneath died instantly, while those further away suffered the most atrocious pain.
The Zyklon blocked the respiratory muscles initially, and so you can imagine the state they were in when they died in 10 minutes. The screams that accompanied these moments eventually came to an end. Everything for a brief moment was over. And then at that point, the doors would open again and the Sonderkommando would arrive. The Sonderkommando were always a group of prisoners. They were employed to take the people, including the corpses, from the gas chamber and then carefully transport them to the crematoria ovens. The bodies were placed inside the ovens using the carts we saw in the Auschwitz I section, and then they were cremated. Here, they could manage to process 7,000 to 8,000 people a day, and the ovens ran continuously, operating 24 hours a day. Unfortunately, in a way, the memory fades here, in this particular place, because they were later blown up to eliminate all traces. They truly believed they could do all of this without anyone ever noticing or realizing what had happened. It's a really strong contrast walking among these blocks because we see green fields. Look how many flowers there are. Yellow, all colorful, the smell of the air. But we're walking in a true open-air cemetery. Over 1 million people among these flowers. This is also an area that isn't usually part of the standard tours for groups, and this is where people actually lived.
Here, in contrast to the other shack we saw earlier, the people living here also had to sleep directly on the floor, which made their situation even more challenging. In this area, there are 3 layers of beds, arranged in 3 lines, one above the other. At first, there was not even a proper floor for them to sleep on. While there were some wooden planks, there was no real floor at the beginning. It was only added later to improve their living conditions a little. Imagine, on each of these levels, 4 to 7 people would have to sleep together, sharing the limited space and enduring very cramped quarters.
Even in this case, there were no bathrooms inside the places where people slept. Only later, down at the bottom we can see it, was a small area designated just for the sink part. These grey warehouses here, including this one back here, are constantly undergoing maintenance work, restoring all that is historical memory. Now we are heading to the bathrooms. But with the Soviet troops steadily advancing, the Germans were ultimately forced to abandon the camps and push westward. This happened in mid-January, but the reality of what truly happened, or at least the gradual realization of what Auschwitz and Birkenau had actually been, only really came on January 27, 1945, when the Soviet troops finally arrived and opened the gates. They found the prisoners who had been left behind here. These were the individuals in the very worst condition, because the others, approximately 60,000 people, had instead set off on the so-called death marches.
The death marches remain the darkest episode in the history of Nazism, the final act of terror of the 12 years of the Third Reich. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet army liberated the camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau. It's estimated that the SS and police forces deported at least 1,300,000 people to the Auschwitz complex between 1940 and 1945. Of these, the camp authorities killed 1,100,000.
In total, at least 1 million Jews were murdered here at Auschwitz. Among the victims were approximately 74,000 Poles, 21,000 Roma, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and 10 to 15,000 citizens from other countries.